Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as I do each and every week. This is episode 153. Hope everybody's having a fantastic week out there in Drumland. As always, we're having a great week over here at the Drum Shuffle World headquarters. We have a great episode for you today. I am going to be joined by Jamie Wollam from Tears for Fears. In just a moment, we have a fantastic conversation about a lot of different topics, some very near and dear to my heart, but I know you're going to get a lot out of it. So we'll be back with Jamie right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com, follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks. All right, guys and girls, as I mentioned, we're going to be joined by the great Jamie Wollam here in just a moment. Jamie has spent the last several years playing with Tears for Fears, arguably one of the biggest, pop groups of all time. Just a fantastic drummer, fantastic human, playing with a fantastic band. Jamie and I got to talk last month, the middle part of October, and we spent a Sunday afternoon just chatting about all things his life, his playing, and we covered a lot of, I'm going to say maybe some heavy territory, but Jamie's very open about his sobriety and his wild times. And I don't talk about it a lot, but I'm coming up on my 5th consecutive year of sobriety. So it's very near and dear to my heart. And I was thankful that he opened up and talked about that and some of the struggles of being a musician and how hard it really is. So I know you're going to get a lot out of this conversation. Again, just a phenomenal drummer. When you hear the story of what he did over the pandemic, you can't help but just have mad respect for Jamie. So please help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle podcast, Jamie Wollam. Hey, good afternoon, Jamie. How's it going, man?
Good, man. How are you?
Man, I cannot complain at all. I understand you are in the Great White North today. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's not too white at the moment. I think weather's temperate, but it is known for being, in Canada, right? Which no matter what anyone thinks of Canada, you probably think close to Alaska. But yeah, it's actually quite beautiful here today. I'm on the west coast of Canada, so very similar to Los Angeles, where I'm from, born and raised. So very similar.
Awesome, man. Well, that's cool. Well, it's October, so the snow will start in Canada.
I was going to say, yeah, we give it another 2 months, and it'll be quite white outside.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know that you kind of just wrapped up the summer run with Tears for Fears. You guys did a lot of North American dates, and I think you guys just finished up Europe. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of went in two parts. There was a live concert tour, and there was some promotional stuff that we just finished in Europe. But the long and the short of it is we started back in May. We opened up the first leg of what is known as a tipping point tour, right? Because it's going to definitely be world touring. Oddly enough, when that last tour we did was booked, it was booked and announced back in November of 2021. So you can imagine this was still in the heat and heart of COVID and venues trying to decide what the protocol was and whatever. So booking was very limited. Plus, a lot of bands were coming out and going on the road at the same time. So there was a lot of air traffic control, I think, around that time too. But we did we did North America. We unfortunately didn't make it to certain parts of North America nor up into Canada. But I think we did 28 shows in the United States and then finished in New York. And then we flew over to the UK, which we were to do 21 shows, I believe, over in the UK. And we got through 8 or 9 of them. And tour was going absolutely smashingly. Shows in the States were killing. We were killing it in England. And unfortunately, it sounds like something from Spinal Tap, but due to a bizarre bus accident, Kurt Smith, one of the two principals in the band, fractured 4 ribs, and we had to cancel about the last 12 dates of the UK portion, which was unfortunate. So, but he's recovered from that, and we just finished about a 2-week run through Germany and France for some promotion to continue to promote the record. It's a fantastic new record that the band hasn't had a studio release in 17 years now. So it's really been amazing. And again, just gearing up for some more. We just got back from that, and we're heading out just after the first of the year, from what I understand. So a lot to come for sure. Yeah, man. Well, and you mentioned the dreaded C word in there, the whole COVID shutdown. Now, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but you've been playing with Tears for Fears for quite a few years now. What was your downtime like in 2020 and 21? Were you doing kind of remote studio work during that time? How did you spend your pandemic, I guess, is the question. Yeah, no, and that's a fantastic question. And, I've thought about many different ways to approach how I talk about my, career and my time. Here's the reality, man. I am as painfully so. I'm as bare bones, as honest as you will ever find in a person when it comes to stuff like this. And the bottom line is there was no work for me. I had just for about a year before that had relocated to Canada. I have dual citizenship, but I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. And due to a number of reasons, which again, happy to get into as we progress, but due to need for recovery, I'm sober, and I'm just took 3 years sober. So this was right around the time I moved up here to just get out of LA. I was really struggling, having a very hard time getting my health and my wellness together, and gone through a really bad breakup, and things were just really, really tough, and I could not get myself square. So as sort of a last-ditch effort, I had an opportunity to come spend some time with my mom and some family up here in Canada, and I put all my stuff in storage and literally came up with a suitcase and an acoustic guitar, not knowing how long I'd stay, and I've been here just about 4 years. Oh, wow. So pandemic started, and then I definitely knew we were in for it. But I had gotten a job anyways during the time that just after I moved up here in a field that I had known and knew nothing about, which was construction. So I got a job at a lumberyard in Canada, which is every bit. Now, everyone who knows the movie, I go straight to Wolverine, right? Like that's, but yeah, man, I grew the beard and I've got the claws, and I'm every bit as Canadian lumberjack, if you could imagine. And yet at the same time, so I spent 2 years working I got my crane license. I got my forklift license. I manage and run a lumberyard here in British Columbia, and it's an amazing job. I've learned so much. It's what's allowing me to be out right now building a shed for all my studio stuff. So yeah, I did not do anything musically during that time, literally nothing. And now it's all just beginning to open back up. And so I'm finishing building a studio, and my goal is to get into a lot more a lot more social media and a lot more, remote recording. That's ultimately my goal, because I love doing session work.
Well, man, that's awesome. And, you touched on a lot of real stuff there, for musicians. And, I guess I'll start with here you are, you've been playing with, one of the, arguably biggest groups ever out of Europe, for several years. And when the pandemic hit, you went and started working at a lumber yard. And, I think a lot of people in our industry, they're like, oh, well, I gave lessons during that time. Nobody wants to say, look, I had to go get a day gig, right? Nobody ever wants to say that, but you did.
No, of course.
And I commend you for that, man. That's awesome.
I thank you for, honestly, man, I thank you for understanding that. And again, not that it's so funny. I'm often drawn back to a stand-up routine. I think it was like Chris Rock or something from years ago that I saw when he was talking about how guys who, in the thug life were like, yeah, well, you don't know. I'm really trying to straighten out. I didn't rob a bank today, or I didn't, hold up that guy at the ATM or something. He's like, man, you didn't do something that you shouldn't be doing anyway, or give you accolades because you read a book today. And it's like, man, so my point is, I appreciate you recognizing it, but it's like, to me, the way that I've been born and raised and grown up, I really hit a point that was transitional for me and huge for me to actually go back to a place in my life where I was working a steady job, where I'm needed, and I'm held accountable, and I have to show up on time, and I have people that work under me that I have to help train, and I have to learn a lot myself. And so all that stuff, like a lot of times when you do music for years and years and years, I think there's a part of, I'll be honest and say, it's a part of what I like to call normal life and real life that I think people and a lot of people I know and are very close to, that they haven't had to partake of in a very long time. And, I'm not saying that makes them less rounded people or anything, but I can tell you it's pretty fascinating, some of the people that I've met where I live who are amazing builders and carpenters and cement workers and whatever, who can also pick up a guitar in their living room and just blow your mind. And they only do it for fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's opened up my eyes to the reality. Like it's an art to being a good builder. It's an art to knowing how to cut wood and work with wood and build foundations and crane things off. And so it's been actually amazingly beautiful. And again, like you said, I think it's just, you can't be afraid to work. And again, I'm not trying to knock anyone else, but I think sometimes in this business, people get a little comfy. They get a little concerned that somehow that's going to not make their rep look good if they had to go out and get a normal job because they're not doing it music. But man, I know lots of people that either had to go get normal jobs or ended up having to move out of the cities they were living in, trying to make a living because they couldn't do it, and move back home. And so, yeah, I speak openly about it, and I'm just super, super grateful that I had a very stable, very healthy, and very needed environment to be a part of. It really, really has helped me keep my head on straight.
Yeah, man. Well, that's awesome. And, you also mentioned your sobriety, and, I don't hide the fact that, I'm coming up on 5 years, of sobriety, and, by the grace of God, I take it one day at a time. You know what I mean? But you talked about being grounded, and, I think that there's just this, oh, well, he's a rock star. How could he waste it all on drugs and alcohol? You hear that from non-musicians, right? Like, how could somebody, but when you're in the bubble, and a lot of people don't understand what that means, but when you're in that bubble, it's very hard to be grounded because, your day is spoken for, and you have your handlers, and, bus call is at 8, and you know what I mean? Like, your day is just planned out for you, and it's real.
It's like, no, literally it's like, and I make no qualms about this, and I've experienced it myself. I have a really funny brief story I'll tell you, but my point is it borders on, hopefully responsible people taking care of very irresponsible, childlike adults who live in a very small bubble. And again, there's beauty that comes out of that bubble, and there's great talent, and there's great reasons why there's such, attention and stuff paid to certain aspects of the touring life and taking care of the rich and famous and whatever. But point being, I don't know, I tend to stray away from anybody that I've ever run into in the business. It's going to be so over the top on stuff like that that they're not grounded. And because I was going to share with you, I remember one time I was I was on tour with Tom Morello. I played with Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, and I was doing some live dates, and we came down for lobby call from a hotel very early. I think it was about 6:30 or something was the lobby call in the morning to get to the airport to catch a flight, because we had a show that night, and we had just played somewhere the night before. And of course, this is when I was living a life of rock stardom, and of course I'm out at the bars and partying with friends and doing all that kind of stuff, to the point where I probably, if I did go to sleep, I probably only grabbed a couple hours. And I remember coming downstairs at 6:30, and I've got my bag with me and my sunglasses on, and I'm all burnt out, and I'm probably still a bit drunk and starting to come down and be hungover. And my first thing was to see the tour manager. And of course, the first thing out of my mouth is, why the F are we, meeting at 6:30? God, that's inhumane, and blah, 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 blah. And he literally walked up and pulled my sunglasses off my face and said, you just played drums in front of 10,000 people last night who loved it and adored it. You're getting on a plane to fly, to Amsterdam today to play in front of another 10,000 people, and you're getting paid for it. Like, you better check yourself.
Yeah, no doubt.
And he was dead serious. And I kind of thought about it, and I thought, whoa. And that has stuck with me, although it took many other years after that of my own personal sort of journey and struggle and demise to come to grips with what it's really like to have led a very self-centered, very kind of selfish kind of life and way of living. And it can be very toxic. Yeah. So I'm grateful, man. I've looked at what I look now. I sit down and I look back at the stuff that I've been places I've been allowed to see, and experiences I've had with music and because of music. And I'm so incredibly grateful. Like, it's mind blowing. I will never take another minute of the opportunity to play music or play drums live in front of people. I will never take that for granted as though it's a burden or a curse. I will always be grateful. I'm so incredibly thankful that I made it through that times, and that I still have an opportunity to play music, because with a fresh and healthy perspective, it's been like nothing I've ever experienced.
Yeah, man, you and me both. Both. Well, I'll change gears a little bit here and kind of back up a little. You're an LA guy, born and raised. When did drumming first come into your life? Do you come from a musical family?
That's a great question. I come from a family that definitely has some musical abilities, but I don't come from a family that's had a lot of professional status. My first drum teacher, and the reason I even got turned on to drums, was because my uncle, who is my dad's the oldest of four, his youngest brother, Rob, my uncle Rob, is a drummer and still is a drummer, has done it professionally in and out of his lifetime, but has ultimately not done it for too many years professionally, but he's an incredible musician. Even to this day, I just saw him and spent some time with him a couple weeks ago. And, still recording. He's got a studio set up, and we geek out and talk drums. And so he was my first drum teacher, my first sort of inspiration, and what turned me on to it. And then my dad is a guitar player. He's always had guitars and fiddles and banjos and stuff lying around. And so I think just from a very early age, I think it was more given the fact that my parents loved music, and that my uncle was a drummer. And I have an older sister who turned me on to some fantastic music, but who wasn't a musician. So no, I don't know I know that I was attracted to drums, period, because of my uncle and because of Peter Criss. And that was all I really remember. Yeah. And then I just remember I saw Kiss live. It was my first concert when I was 10 years old, and it was over. I was hooked, like so hooked. I thought, this is all I want to do. And so even from like the age of, so I got my first drum set when I turned 12, even from the age of 13 or 14, I was reading up on and learning about session drummers. I wanted to be a recording session drummer more than anything, like more than even just being in a band. I remember being 13, 14 and thinking and studying and idolizing guys like Jeff Porcaro and Jim Keltner and Steve Gadd because of Russ Kunkel and J.R. Robinson and all these heavy duty session guys who were just playing on all the records that I loved. So that was my goal. And then so I continued to study privately, but it's definitely my uncle that turned me on to it. And we still inspire and encourage one another to this day.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And, I mean, we kind of joked before we got going here about, just let me be Jim Keltner and I'll be fine kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, I realize sometimes too, that's a really easy, I just have to say this on that thought. because again, I'll reference the fact that for people who didn't hear some of the conversation we had first, that I'm not a big heavy hitter in the world of technical, what I call the geeking out or the nerding out of drums, because I think that I hit a point too where technically, like everyone, I just realized that I was never going to be as good as I think I thought I had to be to compete with some of the guys who were the best, if that makes sense. Like I remember going and seeing Dave Weckl play live in Los Angeles when I was about 19, and I was going to percussion. I was going to PIT at the time, a percussion institute, part of Musicians Institute in LA. And I remember going to see Dave Weckl at the Catalina Club. And it was the first time I can say that I experienced this incredible split of emotions that were so so 180 of one another. I was so inspired and so blown away, yet I felt incredibly depressed too. Like I didn't even want to pick up sticks because I felt like I was so mesmerized and so in awe of the technical ability. I thought there is no way I will ever be able to be that good. So why am I even bothering doing anything? And then I kind of came full circle around it and went, I just want to do what I love. And where does my heart gravitate to when I start playing, and who are the drummers and what's the kind of music and what do I want to do? And I thought, man, I want to be a singer-songwriter's drummer. Like I want to be the guy that can play for the song. Steve Jordan and Jim Keltner and, the technical stuff. And it's not because I don't want to learn that stuff, but I just have my limits. And especially now at 52, like I wanted to become a professional player. And the funny part is, and this might segue into the rest of this episode or another episode, is the funny part is on a professional level, the opportunities I've had to work and the people that I played with far prefer a drummer that approaches his drumming from where I'm at than the guys who are all about the technical aspect. Because even though does that make sense? So the young, energetic, feverish, technical, like that's all fantastic, but you probably bring 1/100th of that into a gig with a professional singer-songwriter or a band or whatever, and you'll get your keys handed to you and your jacket handed to you and said, you know what I mean, and shown the door, because it just doesn't go. Which doesn't mean, so I've really tended to gravitate toward what makes a drummer feel the time a certain way, what makes the song feel the certain way, what makes his backbeat and his drums sound that way. And so I've gotten more into those specifics than how fast I can play the molar technique with a single-handed roll, because I'd never do that. I'd never do that anyway,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we're close to the same age. I'm a little bit younger than you, but, there's a little ribbon for you. But, back when we started, there was no Instagram, there was no Facebook, there wasn't even an internet, right? So I just think
exactly.
that I think today, like I can scroll through Instagram and be completely depressed because there's like, a 7-year-old girl in Japan that can play circles around me, right? But, for every 10,000 bands, there's one Frank Zappa that needs that guy, right? Like a Bozio,
exactly.
or whatever the case may be. But there's 1,000 or 10,000 other bands that need somebody that can just come in and make it feel good and play good time. Yeah. And, that's what I've always gravitated towards myself, because I'm not a chops guy either. And I just think for every chops guy, there needs to be 10,000 guys that can,
exactly.
do a wedding band gig and make Brown Eyed Girl feel right. You know what I mean?
100%. And some of the best drummers, it's really amazing. But since I feel like I've had the awareness of exactly what we're talking about, some of the best drummers I feel like I've ever seen in my life were guys that you've never heard their name, and they were in the jazz trio that was playing at the restaurant I was eating at in New York City.
Yeah.
Where the guy's timing and he was just a working, fantastic, maybe taught too, but you hadn't heard of his name, and yet he made these songs. You could tell he had technique. You could tell he knew how to play drum. He was a seasoned veteran of playing great pickup kind of commercial gigs like that. And so it just amazes me. I just feel like I've made this sort of comparison before. I feel like drummers, all the drummers that are in the world right now, it's like a giant stew. And of course, every stew needs its main ingredient, like it's a pork stew or it's a beef stew or it's a chicken stew or whatever. And so you've got your Neil Pearts and your Buddy Riches and your whatever. But like, I'm perfectly happy being a carrot or a piece of celery, because it accentuates and adds to it, but you're not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm okay not having to be in the four, because there's still a necessity for there's still a necessity for the celery.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And, I mean, we talk about this a lot on this podcast. And, I think that, it's great to have aspirations to be the next Dave Weckl. I think that's fantastic. But if you want to get out and play a lot, you have to be able to do exactly what you're talking about. And that is play the standards and make it feel right, where the band leader isn't turning around going, "Okay, Jamie, knock that off." I mean, that's
exactly,
the last thing you want.
Well, and the funny part that I can share this too, but I can tell you from experience, there's been many, many times where I have also, as a reverse, I've heard players who play fantastic chops and they play fast. And there's guys right now that we all know that I can sit and watch their videos and just get just mortified in a good way. Like, my jaw drops. I'm like, how can you play that fast? How can you play that? What is this? What is he subdividing? What is he, whatever? And then the point being, then you hear them go to a groove. And again, it sounds like I'm trying to be negative. I'm not, I promise, but there's things lacking in the way that they play the groove that needs to be felt, that doesn't feel like some of the guys, if that makes sense. Like, you pick and choose where you're going to spend your time. And if you really want to get serious about your feel and your meter and playing with the click and your drum sound and session work and stuff, it's a whole different set of skills that you go down versus those ones. Unless, like I said, all you're doing is instructional videos because you do a certain thing. So, like I said, there's call for everybody. I'm just very, very much content and happy being a guy who can work on trying to make the music feel the way it's supposed to feel, whatever that intended feel is, because that can be all over the map. But yeah, who can work on feel and really has a drum sound that when you hear it, it can make you feel something. Those are my goals now at this point in my career.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, let me ask you this, because I think this is interesting. Back in 2020, there was kind of this, viral drum challenge going around, and it was, hey, play drums to Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And you've been in that chair now for, gosh, are you coming up on what, 8 years, 10 years with Tears?
My first gig was in February 2010, so I got the gig the tail end of 2009. So first gig 2010, it's going on 12 years.
Oh my God, almost, man! Time gets away from us. Yeah. But you've been sitting in that chair.
The thing is, I've held the drum chair the longest of any drummer, and yet only just now was able to play on an album, because they haven't had a studio album in 17 years.
Yeah, man. Well, that's awesome. But so I know you saw some of that stuff on social media. You've been sitting in that chair playing that groove, and while not technically difficult to play, to make that song feel right, you got to know what's going on. So
exactly,
when you were seeing all that stuff, this viral challenge that all these drummers were doing, were you sitting there kind of going, "Yep, this guy's got it. Nope, that guy doesn't."
Well, it was really funny. If you want to know the God's honest truth, the majority of those videos I saw at first, most of them that came across my plate or that someone tagged me in or sent my way, most of them were pretty amazing. Like, I was blown away at people's mastering of metric modulation and playing straight within the swing and the whole thing, to the point where I got to admit, it made me jealous of the fact that I couldn't really do that kind of thing to that extent. However, then my thought was, and I never did it, because then I thought, oh no, I'll really make a statement with that. For probably a good 3 months, I was dead set on filming myself setting up the whole piece, like, okay, here we go. Yeah, here, everybody. Well, I've been the drummer for the last, 12 years. This is my take on the version, whatever. And then let the song roll and actually just play exactly the groove that I play live, which is exactly like the song. And thought, like, that's the way. it's supposed to be like as a joke, right? Here comes the guy who you think, well, let's see what he does with it. And basically I just played the simplest version, which is exactly what I play live. But I thought, no, people will think I'm bagging. That's going to be taken as though I don't appreciate everyone's things towards stuff. So, but I didn't do it. But my point is I was blown away and yeah, I saw some amazing drummers go and play what, is a legendary and famous group. Although the funny part is I still get questions and wonder how many people actually play it correctly, because I've heard about 10 million ways of people playing the simplistic beat as well. So yeah, it's pretty funny. It's an interesting group for sure.
Well, and I know like on the studio version of that song, there's some electronics going on and some loops or whatever. But what I find interesting, and it may have been on this last tour, you guys may have incorporated some of that back in the live set. But for many years, you guys were not using anything as far as samples or loops or anything, and you were recreating it all live, with your four limbs. Which I think ups the degree of difficulty, right?
Well, it depends. What we've done, what has since I've joined the band, things have actually kind of come full circle. I joined the band in 2010. I've never used one stitch of electronics, nor have we used sampled drums or any sort of electronic drums live. What I've played to from the time I joined the band in songs like Rule the World and stuff is there's sometimes heavy shaker patterns that are on track. There's been, other synthesizers and special effects and things like that have been on track. But the bulk of the reason we have played to a click has been because Roland and Kurt really like the fact that we play the songs at the same tempo every night, so that adrenaline and things like that don't get away from you, because the specific placement of the tempos of a lot of their hits, they're just felt good at a specific place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me, just taking a sip of water. So yeah, we, but on this new tour, and because I actually got to, for the first time, construct how I wanted to approach the songs on this new record that I played on, I wanted to break it down onto, how I could best serve playing this, recreating the song when you hear it on the album, recreating as close live, because that is also something that I know Tears and I've experienced is very calculated about, is trying to get as close to the sounds, whether it's the synth sounds or the guitar sounds or whatever, so that we recreate as much of the album, live, without leaning too heavily on tracks and loops. And so I've gotten to, for the first time, I've actually incorporated electronics within my kit. So I've got 3 pads to the side of me that are electronic pads that I trigger original sounds straight off the masters, the master recordings, and I have a trigger bass drum pedal for some options there. So yeah, I definitely am incorporating it for the first time. But again, everything that is on track that I play to has either been lifted straight off the master or involves more the percussive side of things. So I've never triggered it, nor do I trigger any of my acoustic drums live. That's all just acoustic sound. So recently there's been a bunch of videos that have come out of some performances we did back in January for promotion for the new record. And recently this one for KCRW came out. Bottom line is we went into the Village recording studio in West LA back in January. We rehearsed a bit off the new record and some of the old ones, and we filmed again because of COVID. We couldn't go into these places, Good Morning America and Stephen Colbert, but we set up different studio settings and we recorded performing these songs live. And as these things have come out, the KCRW one just came out a couple days ago, and I was watching it for the first time and was just really blown away at how I'm a fan of this band as well, if that makes sense. I was blown away and really just touched, and sometimes I have to pinch myself to remind myself that I'm playing with such an exceptional band. These guys are just fantastic, and their perfectionism is still very, very noted and still very present. So it takes a lot of work. That's where I put my brain power and my thought and my whatever is in how I can get the best drum sound and create the best drum parts and bring these songs to life. So that's where I definitely spend my energy.
Yeah, man, for sure. Well, I think for people that, maybe aren't familiar with the new record that you played on, everybody knows the hits from back in the day, right? But I hate this term, but a lot of people will say, oh, well, it's a legacy act, right? But, like you said, they hadn't put out a studio record for a lot of years, 17 years or whatever. What was the experience like going into the studio, like that first day where you like, okay, I've really got to get myself together here? Or was it just a continuation of just working with incredible musicians?
Well, the interesting part about how this record was done, that's the first time that I've ever experienced anything like it in my professional career as well, was the record was sort of done in stages and done in parts over a period of about, no joke, over the period of about 7 years. So
I've
gone into the studio 3-4 different times with Tears over the last 7 years, doing drum tracks or partial drum tracks. A big way that this album was created too was that they had loops and stuff that I had played on previously. Like I went in and did a 2 days worth of sessions with those guys where I just set up variations of different kits and played variations of grooves to different tempos. I basically created a library of loops at different tempos of me playing that were then used to kind of chop up and create the underlying patterns for the songs. And then I came back another time and did some overdubs once they had put together basic tracks, because again, the writing and the way that they were writing and putting this music together took many turns and took many different took on many different entities throughout the course of that 7 years, and then changed almost entirely during the COVID pandemic, where they went back and pulled out old songs that they had thought were not going to be. And so it was very, very unique how it was put together. But during the sessions that I did for the record, I do remember thinking, this is going to be interesting how it will all come out. And then once I heard the final product and was sent a copy of the album just before it was mastered, I was absolutely blown away. And it just, again, reminded me and brought to light my amazement at how talented these guys are.
Yeah, man, for sure. Well, I mean, I just think that, for people that think, if anybody listening to this thinks, oh, Tears for Fears, they were an 80s band. You got to listen to the new record, because they are not an 80s band. Certainly 100%. Not.
And I think, there's a lot of people that, I put it this way. The other thing that's been incredibly mind blowing for me is the fact that in reading reviews and in hearing reviews about this new record, not once have I heard someone say that they didn't think it was in it. Like I've heard a lot of people say I've not heard one review that anyone thought it was bad. And if anything, I've heard quite the contrary. The people are saying that they think it's some of the best work Tears has ever done. So, and again, I just think, that they're not a nostalgia act or a legacy act when you listen to this new record, because it's evident, it's undeniable, and just listening to it, how well it was done and how well it was produced and how good the songwriting is.
Yeah, man, I agree 100%. So let's talk a little bit about influences. I mean, you've mentioned, Keltner and Gad and some of those cats, and Peter Criss, you mentioned. Who else, when you were young, just like really did it for you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think the drummers that I listened to when I was first playing tended to be much more of the hard rock side. It's weird. I don't know if people who came and saw me would walk away with this, although over the years I have heard very much this thing. John Bonham was it for me. Like John Bonham, Phil Rudd from AC/DC was one of my biggest and earliest influences. And again, as I'm sure you can appreciate as a drummer, I think Phil Rudd sometimes gets so much flack or slack for not being, whatever. And I challenge anyone to make, even the other amazing drummers that have played with AC/DC over the years, Simon Wright and Chris Slade and some of these other guys, again, great drummers, but they don't sound like Phil Rudd. and he is just a thing about his playing. John Bonham, that is what it is. Alex Van Halen, same thing. I think from a very early age, I could tell his drum style very clearly, but it was also his drum sound, such a recognizable snare drum sound. And when he got into the Simmons toms and Paistes, you could just tell they were Paiste cymbals. And so there was a guy named Tommy Aldridge, who I'm not sure if that name rings a bell with you, but he was
absolutely. Black Oak, Arkansas, White Snake, Ozzy Osbourne.
Travers, Ozzy Osbourne. Tommy Aldridge is absolutely by far within my top 3 ever, because I was a huge double bass fan growing up, and I just thought the way that he approached the double bass and his speed and his musicality on double bass and the way he used it, incorporated into fills more than playing it as a 16th note bottom beat underneath like the way that he approached it blew my mind. And so definitely Tommy Aldridge. Peter Criss I loved because I think that was definitely more of the combining the image of rock and roll and the whole hype of just than me ever necessarily thinking he was this incredible drummer. But he had a thing for sure. Peter Criss had a thing that was undeniable. But definitely Tommy Aldridge, definitely Alex Van Halen, definitely John Bonham. And then as far as when I started getting into recording, 100% it was Jeff Beccaro. Steve Gadd has been, and probably more recently as far as the last 10 years, I would say Steve Jordan for sure. Nate Smith, I think, is absolutely incredible. How his right hand and his hi-hat work and his feel. There's just a bunch of guys, but I'd say that those guys, a lot of the heavy rock drummers. I remember a guy named Clive Burr that was Iron Maiden's first drummer before Nico McBrain. He was a huge influence in mine because I first learned Run to the Hills, and Rick Allen from Def Leppard, amazing drummer as well. Just so again, I came from what I guess would be known as sort of the 80s hair metal time, and so a lot of those guys, Tommy Lee, Bobby Blotzer, but again, even at that time, I looked forward to hearing guys that played a bit more and went a bit more outside. But again, I come full throttle now as an adult. I look back and I go, man, Ricky Rocket played some great drum parts. At the time, I didn't think he was anywhere near the caliber of Tommy Lee or whatever. But I look back now and I go, man, he was every bit a great. He's the one that made those Poison songs feel like Poison songs,
Yeah.
So I'm much more appreciative of what people brought to the table that created a thing, if that makes sense. So.
No, it absolutely does. And, the other thing about Ricky that I find really interesting is people, it really blew off Poison as, just all bubblegum and hairspray and all of that. And, I challenge anybody to write 3 records as good as their first 3 records were.
100%. 100%. And again, like them or don't like them, it's undeniable that they did a thing. And for the most part, what they did, people dug and people related to. And again, if you can stay true, this is the great equalizer or the great striving point. If you can stay true and feel like what you're creating musically is viable, is reputable. You don't feel like you're consciously selling out as an artist to create this music or write under a certain type of genre or whatever. You're not, it's not formulated. If you can still do what you want to do and how you want to represent yourself as a musician and people love it, then you've hit the best of both worlds because you're not sacrificing your artistic freedom or artistic vision for the sake of wanting to sell records. Yet there's a lot of people that go back and forth and vacillate between the two things. And if you can actually do what you're doing and love what you're doing artistically and commercially people love it and it resonates with a lot of people, then you've hit the jackpot.
Yeah, for sure. And, Ricky is a sweetheart of a guy too. And
100%.
I can tell you offline, but I got to hang out at his house once years ago.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
Just almost by sheer accident, but he treated me like family, and he didn't know me from Adam. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And just treated me
super nice guy.
Yeah, just a super sweetheart of a guy, man. So so I don't let anybody disparage Poison on my show. So
Amen. Beautiful. And I appreciate that very much because I think there's no need to disparage anyone who basically if they're out there doing their thing. I mean, again, sometimes I realize that people who are People who are haters of other things for situations they're only hating it because those people managed to probably figure out or do something that hater has always wanted to do, but couldn't figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. And the one thing that I noticed about all of your influences, those are guys that don't just lay down grooves. They dig ditches for their bands.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. And I think that there is an art form in and of itself of that. I think most drummers can play a groove and make it feel okay. But the guys that absolutely dig a ditch for their band, I love bands where you know that they're like 2 seconds from just completely falling apart if it
100%.
If it weren't for that drummer, right?
Absolutely. And there's man, I know it very well. And I think it's part of the reason. I will tie it back to say that when we're talking about all the, again, the stuff we're talking about is pretty heady and pretty cerebral for those that, and my assumption and trust is that most of the people that will listen to this podcast, right, are drummers that can relate to in some way, shape, or form differently, but this will resonate with most of them to some degree, right? The thing that blows me away about, I don't know. The bottom line is, yes, I think it comes down to there's an intricacy and a beauty to creating something that makes your mark. And sometimes it doesn't have to, sometimes it can be the technical, but man, I got to be honest with you. Sometimes I think that the need to go back and look at things like if I were to mention, let me turn this around, if you don't mind, for 2 minutes and reverse the interview and say, if I asked you, Alex Van Halen, what makes you think of, what do you think of when you think of Alex Van Halen? I wouldn't think you necessarily think of chops, right?
No. I mean,
what would be the first thing that comes to your mind if you had to describe Alex Van Halen, or something that you connect with Alex Van Halen by name would be what? To his drum.
Obviously his snare sound. That's the
right?
first thing that comes up. And then the second thing I think about is how intricate yet simple some of his stuff was. And I think most of that comes from growing up playing with Edward.
Exactly. Yeah, man. And so that thing, right? Whatever that thing is, that is his thing. The beauty of and again, this is really heady, but I can sum it up with one statement. Where I'm at right now in my musical journey in my life is the realization that instead of trying to create or cultivate a very precise thing, an image, if you would, or be the best at a certain avenue of your drumming, if you're so passionate about what you do, and it doesn't have to be, I guess I'm throwing it back to this scenario, right? And this concept is, I don't think Led Zeppelin, of course they were concerned, or they wanted to have their sound be good. They wanted, Jimmy Page obviously wanted a Les Paul through a Marshall and whatever, and Bonham had his Ludwigs, and there was thought put into that. But my point is, it was more about what happened when those four musicians picked up their instruments and began to play music together. Yes, their instruments helped create the sound, but it was what they did, their soul, part of their personality and their character. And when you get the right combination of those characters doing what they just naturally do, and you turn that volume knob up on what each person naturally does when they just do their thing, and that combination makes something like Van Halen or U2 or the Rolling Stones, or that's when you get this insane magic where no one is trying to be something that isn't 100% them anyway, but them each being 100% themselves creates this 400% of this band and this thing and this feel. And that's what I got. That's part of, so like Eddie and Alex, that was all natural. No matter what, you cannot put two guys together and say, you can come close, but you can say, you play like Alex Van Halen, you play like Eddie Van Halen, and write a song that sounds Van Halen-ish. And, there's way too much thought that would have to be put into that than what happened when those guys got together and made music, right? So, but I guess what I'm saying too is I'm trying to focus more on releasing or bringing to life what is the fullest natural me when I think of what comes out of me naturally as a drummer. That's what I'm trying to capitalize on. And to me, like I said, that's about my groove, my feel, and about creating a really good, memorable sound experience for anyone who's coming to hear the music that I'm playing.
Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, I could spend my whole life, trying to be a second-rate John Bonham clone, or I can be the best Jamie Eads that I can possibly be. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, 100%. But the odd part is that sometimes it's like you can't make a tomato ripen before it's time. A bottle of wine doesn't ferment or doesn't age to its appropriate place before it's time. It's almost like I couldn't have made myself come to this realization any other way than letting it happen when it happens, right? Because a good chunk of my younger career and younger profession was spent trying to be something, figure out what I was going to be, and you learn who ultimately you are by throwing into your blender all of the examples, all of the what's the word I'm looking for? Inspirations, all of the people that I admired, all the people I listened to. And wanted to play like. I take all those ingredients, throw them into the blender, and then what comes out is whatever is me, right? Is the combination of how I feel drums and rhythm and music and what comes naturally, what's instinctive. And that was all shaped by the influences and inspirations that I had as drummers and still have them now, man. I'll sit down and try and go, for this song, I want to feel like how would Steve Jordan approach it? And ultimately, it's still going to be Jamie Wollam playing it, and it's going to sound like me playing it, but I can use those examples and things that I want to sort of have it sound like and in the vein of, which is very helpful. But again, it's all going to come out sounding like me because I just let it be me. I don't cognizantly think it has to sound like somebody else, right?
Yeah, well, and everybody is their own filter too. You know, I mean, I try to explain that to people all the time. You can put a gun to my head and say, play like Alex Van Halen, and I might be able to get close, but it's still going to be Jamie Eads playing like Alex Van Halen.
And the amazing thing, Jamie, is that if Alex Van Halen were to walk in your studio and sit down and go, oh man, can I play your kit? If he sat down and started playing, it's going to sound like Alex Van Halen.
Absolutely. Well, and I was
your kit on a baby kit, you could tell it would be Alex Van Halen. And it's that sort of signature thing and again, those variations of what that could be, they have a wide array of what they could be. But like I said, it's just my goal is to be able to have someone hear something of mine and go, oh, if they knew me anyway, would go, yeah, that sounds like Jamie.
Yeah,
you know?
For sure, man. And I think that's a wonderful thing to aspire to. And, another thing that I would point out, you said you can't make the fruit ripen before it's ready. You're short-lived into your sobriety. And I don't know if it's similar for you as it was for me, but the first time that I went into a session after I got sober, I was like, who is this person playing right now? Because
yeah, 100%.
My mindset was completely different. And, the producer that I was working with, he was like, wow, man, what got into you?
Yeah. I oddly enough, I got to share this with you too, man. But going into this last tour that we started in May, I had some sleepless nights and some nights I woke up in a panicky sweat because I was petrified about going out and knowing how I was going to be able to, if I was going to be able to, number one, perform as well or the same or good, or if 2 years without doing any real drumming. And again, just remember this, when I said this earlier, when I moved up to Canada, I didn't come with a drum set. I didn't even have a drum set to play on. I hadn't even played or picked up sticks or sat on a drum kit for almost 2 years by the time I got my first kit up here. So it was, and then to come from that, and I've worked in a trade with my hands and a very physical job. My body's not getting any younger. I really struggled with wondering, with a lot of anxiety about wondering if I was going to be able to come back in and play professionally at a level. And then, but I realized too, that was a lot of just anxiety from newness and recovery. And there's a lot of firsts in recovery. And part of the first I had to do was handling my apprehensions and my fear and my nervousness and whatever, and channeling that stuff and and doing that all sober, which was which was unique. Wasn't going to say it's difficult. The only thing difficult about it was managing the adrenaline and the fear. But once I really got a couple shows under my belt and was reaffirmed and reassured that I still possessed the things in me that I really needed to do it professionally, then it was actually the opposite. I felt like I was able to put my foot down on the pedal and just drive harder and do things. Like I said, my voice was able to be heard more on this tour than a lot of other times in the past.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, no, it makes perfect sense. And, I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to wrap up soon, but I'm curious, that first time you played after, realizing your sobriety, did you have the exact same experience as me? And that is, you reconnected with the 13-year-old Jamie? Like you found that joy again?
Yeah, man. It's such a beautiful way to describe that, Jamie, but that was exactly what I feel. That's exactly what happened. And it's exactly what I think. Put it exactly like you said. That was what occurred and has occurred with many people who have experienced that and what we've both gone through in our journey. But yeah, I felt like, again, when you say 13-year-old Jamie playing drums for the first time, what I've experienced is this insane level of passion, focus and clarity and recommitment, if you would, to like some of the fire that had me sitting down at a drum practice pad or a drum set, and really thinking about what I was doing and just being, that's what comes from when you're passionate about something, right? So yeah, I was reconnected with that. I was also reconnected with the Jamie that was scared, absolutely scared shitless to get on stage and play because I was nervous. I was afraid of, not doing well or making a mistake or doing whatever, which again, alcohol and drugs, as you continue to use those in your life and you've been playing music professionally and using drugs and alcohol as part of your program for a long time, that whole thing we're talking about, that whole clarity and presence gets waxed over incredibly hard. It's like sometimes there's nights I never really played wasted, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of nights and times leading up to a show or the part afterwards or whatever, like it's all a blur and there's not a lot of clarity around so much of my professional life in those, and I'm really sad about that, but I've made peace with it, right? But I'm back to that place where, I experience it, I feel it all, and it's an amazingly beautiful feeling, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, for sure.
Yeah, man. Same experience.
I feel like a kid. Definitely feel like a kid again.
Yeah, same experience for me. The first show after being sober, where you don't have your 2 drinks before you play or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, we sound, man, not only by name, we sound like we've had some amazingly parallel moments, which again, this opportunity to connect with you has been beautiful. And you and I have begun a friendship that will take us into many more conversations off of recording about, and I think we've probably had some amazingly similar experiences.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. And
it's beautiful.
And it goes without saying, anytime you want to be on this show, you're more than welcome. And I do want you to keep us posted on everything that's going on. And, I just think the world needs, this is going to sound so ridiculous, but the world needs these honest and real conversations. And like I told you, I don't talk about, hey, what was that fill you did going into the third chorus? Because I think we have YouTube for that, right?
Well, and not only do I appreciate your approach, but the reality is more than likely, and yeah, I say this with humor, but it's more true than it is humorous. If that was going to be the type of conversation, I'd have to do a heck of a lot more prep work in advance to even remember, because my answer would be, I don't have any idea. I don't even remember. If you can play it for me again or whatever, I'll try and explain it. But half the time, that's not even where the stuff we're talking about is what actually shapes and creates what comes out of me when I sit down on the drum set. Like, how does that make sense? Like where I'm at in my life and how where I'm at in my recovery and where I'm at with my peace of mind and where I'm at in my responsibility level and my relationships in my life, when those are good and there's balance and they're healthy, like that all comes across in what I play. And that's far more tangible or in essence than something as specific as a ostinato pattern or something, which again, no bagging on that. But I love the opportunity to talk about the things that we have shared. It's, I think it's incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you saying so, but I mean, I just think it's more important to understand what makes this player tick. Like what shaped their life to get them in the chair that they're in today. And, you know, that's what the 13-year-old me would have wanted to know. If I could have sat down with Tommy Lee when I was 13 and he was my idol, those are the things that I would have wanted to known about. You know what I'm saying?
100%, man. 100%. And we will, if you're good with it, we will schedule and have a part 2 where we get to compare some more notes. And again, but what you've really done, and I appreciate this too, is you've opened up a thought pattern with myself about sometimes you don't realize where your own mindset or your own vision is at until you're asked to talk about it or explain about it. And so this conversation has brought a sort of a re-awareness and revisiting to where I'm at in that stage of the game as well with my career and how I approach drumming. So I love it. It's always really nice to talk to a drummer at this stage and understanding of stuff too, because I think it's what I've longed for in the drumming community is more conversation and more education and more openness about some of the stuff that that doesn't have anything to do with how fast you play your double paradiddles, right? Or the whatever. It has to do with how do you properly pack a suitcase when you tour, and how do you here's a good way to handle customs when you got to go blah blah blah, or how to work out in your hotel room, and important things about taking vitamins and trying to get proper rest, because whatever, everyone thinks that's, but man, it becomes a very real part of your life and your career if you want to do it professionally. And I never read too many articles about that. If anything, what I saw was exactly the opposite. You mean I can drink a 3/4 of a fifth of Jack Daniels like Tommy Lee and somehow still be cool and not die? But that's not really quite the honest interpretation of what's happening, or the honest, vision of what's happening. So no, man, I think it's beautiful, and I'd love to join you again in the future. Yeah,
well, we'll make sure we do that. But in the meantime, man, thanks for your time. I appreciate you doing it and coming on the Drum Shuffle, and we'll talk real soon, man.
Absolutely, Jamie. I thank you for having me too, and hopefully I didn't bore you or anybody else too bad.
No, man, this was great. We'll talk real soon.
You got it, buddy.
All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up episode 153 of the Drum Shuffle podcast. Thank you all so much for streaming, downloading, and tuning in. We simply cannot do it without each and every one of you doing so week in and week out. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing so. The biggest thing that you can do to help us out as a show, a podcast, is to share a link with a friend. Hit the thumbs up, the like, the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to tune in and listen to the Drum Shuffle so that you don't miss any of our fantastic episodes that we have upcoming. 1,000,001 thanks to Jamie Wollam for taking time out of his busy schedule to come on and have a very open dialogue about his life and history. It just means the world to me. He's such a great dude, and I thank him for his time. As always, we answer every single email that we get here at the Drum Shuffle Podcast. Our email address is thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com. And you can always find more information about me over at jamieeads.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We can't do it without you. I thank you 1,000,001 times as well for tuning in and listening. We simply cannot do it without you. So until next time, may your head stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.